Welcome, everyone, to another Sunday Satsang. Something that feels rather important to point out, maybe again and again, until it really lands in the system. Because sometimes we think we are listening to something or we are hearing something, and maybe even thinking or believing that we understand what it means until it lands in a certain way and it clicks. It clicks, and it's known in that clicking that, oh, until now I wasn't hearing. That is why it becomes useful, and sometimes it's recommended to listen to something again and again, or read something again and again. Even in religions, when they say to read some prayers or say some prayers every day, it might be one of the reasons why that would have been recommended. Because the timeless messages have a quality of being, well, timeless. So every time they're read or they're heard, something else there's a possibility for something new to be revealed every time in the same words. We may think, oh, I've listened to it. I know what they're saying, until we really do. And when what has been said in the concept is really seen directly, it is understood how the words just cannot talk about what is being said, and yet it is known what the words have been pointing out to. So it might not be a bad idea to keep listening until the listening really has happened. And that doesn't mean to make an effort to understand or to listen, because mostly effort actually is the reason we are unable to listen clearly. So if it's possible to just sit back and let the listening happen and let the concept be received in whatever way it needs to be received in this moment. So what feels like coming up today as a pointing, and it feels really important to just keep hammering that down again and again. That anything that arises within, without, the concept of within and without, whether suffering arises, whether peace arises, whether lack of patience, frustration arises, or love arises. So, what I mean to say is whether something pleasant arises or something painful arises is not in my control. And that includes the circumstance and the inner attitude or interpretation of the circumstance. The whole spectrum as it arises, one way, is not my doing, is not in my control, is not of my choosing. Including the motivation to think positive or to forget about the whole search one day, or to feel productive, to be able to be productive, or to just lie around not feeling like doing anything, not feeling the juice in life anymore. Whatever is being experienced at any level of the experience is not my doing. Why is it important to see that? How does it matter? Well, if it is not my doing, then it is not my job to fix it if it's painful, or maintain it if it's pleasant. It's not my job or my responsibility to interfere within what is arising. And it is possible to see that even that interference is what is arising within that spectrum of experience itself. Is there a possibility to just let whatever arises arise, however good, enlightened, peaceful, blissful, loving, compassionate, wise it may seem to be, or however the opposite of all of that it may seem to be? Is there a possibility to let pleasure be, let it arise, let it play out, including the enjoyment of it, and let it pass, maybe including the resistance to letting it go? And then, is it possible to let the pain arise, play its course, including the pain that comes with it, the uneasiness, the preference for it to not be there? Is it possible to let that energy also play out as an arising with it? That's the very nature of pain. Pain feels like pain. And there's a whole spectrum of how painful something can be for my system. And is it possible to just allow that pain to be as it is, including the effort to maybe take a medicine to mitigate the pain, or go see a doctor if it's something that can be worked with taking help from a specialist, or taking a nap if it's a headache. And I think if I've seen that if I sleep and take a nap, it generally goes away. So including the strategies and the actions that are taken to deal with the pain. But is it okay to not fight the arising of pain in the way that, oh, something invalid has happened, or this couldn't have happened, or because this has happened, something is existentially wrong with my life? Is it possible to see that pleasure and pain is exactly how the flow of life is designed to be? It will be pleasure sometimes, and that feels great, and it will be pain other times, and that doesn't feel so great. Is it possible to let that play out? Is it possible to not feeling so great be allowed as the inevitable opposite of the great? It's not in the arising of pain, physical, emotional, that there is suffering. Suffering is an added layer of something must be wrong, that there is pain. That layer of discomfort, that layer of existential sense of lack because there is pain and it couldn't have been this way. That layer in itself is the suffering, which is so intertwined with the arising of pain that it goes unnoticed. It feels like that the pain itself is uneasy. And yes, at a certain level, it is supposed to be uneasy. However, there is an added layer of this cannot be this way narrative that is so deep rooted within the system and arises so simultaneously with the arising of pain that it goes unnoticed that these are two different arisings, and one is suffering and the other is just what's arising. And in the beginning, it is important maybe to see the difference between those, the quality of those arisings. And then at another point, it is important to see that both of them yet are an arising, not my doing. The pain arises, not that I choose to go through the pain. And the suffering arises with the pain, not that I choose to suffer. They both arise of their own accord, not my doing. And not my doing is basically saying that there is no other way but to surrender to what is arising, because I'm not the doer of them, however functional or dysfunctional it may seem to be. And the surrender at the beginning of the spiritual search may seem like the end goal to arrive, that only if I could fully surrender, it's done, the process is done. And yet, this surrender is only the beginning point. Because only from this place of acceptance, surrender to whatever is exactly as it is in this moment, all the layers, the physical layer of how my body is, what I feel about my body, how the circumstances, how my relationships are, and what do I feel about them, and then going within what my thoughts are, what the narratives are, what the core beliefs are, what emotions and feelings are there in the system, and what are the triggers for them, and how they play out in different situations, and all of that is somehow intricately designed in such a unique and complex way that there is no other way to be with it but just to be with it without trying to judge it or even label it. um, this should be this way or this shouldn't be that way. All of that can be seen as part of the system and yet unnecessary. So this surrender can happen where what everything that is arising is somehow not fought with, not questioned as invalid, and why is it here? And that from that surrender, true aware, maybe we can say all the things that we so long for, compassion and wisdom and equanimity, all those qualities somehow flower from that beginning point of surrender, which is not some mystical experience. It's just plain and simple okayness with whatever is here. However, enlightened or unenlightened it may seem to be. However, further in the process, or so so unimpressive in the process it may seem to be. However mature or immature it may seem to be. And to really address this beginning point of surrender, this existential okayness with life as it is, all these concepts of self-love, self-care, self-acceptance, and even the concept of not being the doer. Until it's really seen, these concepts are really aimed at facilitating this beginning point of okayness with whatever is, including the suffering, including the unenlightened nature of the system, including the restrictions and limitations and the pain and the stuck narratives and emotions and blind spots that are still here. And as that surrender or acceptance kicks in or clicks, that's already a big load of heaviness taken off from the system. Because now something is not engaging in trying to control and manipulate. However, the system is, that energy is freed up. Because it has seen the counterproductiveness of that. It is seen that that engagement was part of the problem, maybe if not the cause of the problem. And if that engagement that comes from a place of non-acceptance falls away, it is actually possible to see that there is no problem. Life is not a problem that needs to be solved. Life just is. It is what it is in this moment, including everything that is being thought, that is being felt, that feels like it's missing, or that feels like, oh wow, it's complete. All of that is included within the super flow of life, exactly as it is, impersonal, not anybody's doing, but just how it is. Just this one concept clicking in the system feels like the beginning of the end of the suffering. Not by choice, not by my doing, not by my decision. The click may happen or not. And both of those happenings are impersonal. Let's open up the space. If there is any conversation that needs to happen, feel free to raise your electronic hand on Zoom. And then let's see where we go from what arises now. Franco.
Hi, Gurleen.
Hi, Ranko. How are you?
I'm nice. And you?
Good, very good. Thank you.
Great. I hear your voice is almost completely getting back to normal.
Yay. Yeah, with time.
Yeah, great. Yes. So I was thinking about this topic, and for me, it's most important thing is identification. And this identification is happening with this our thinking mind of ours. And I said, someone, maybe Ramesh, said that ego is identified consciousness. So identification in a way is a natural process. It has to happen. We cannot really avoid it. And why this is happening to be identified in a wrong way, in a way that there is misunderstanding. Why this thinking mind is bringing us identification, which is really not the true identification. So I was thinking, because this thinking mind is just presenting us one layer of our existence, which we can call material layer of existence or outside layer of existence. But we are not just that layer. We are multi-layered. We have all these other layers. In thinking mind, it doesn't really consider all these other layers. It doesn't complete the whole picture. We just see it from one perspective, which is very, very limited perspective. So in that sense, identification becomes a problem, because we think that we are something which actually we are not, because we are not including all these other layers in the picture. So for me, that is very, very important realization, and I just want to share it a little bit.
Yes, yes. Very, very valid. It comes down to, and that is exactly what wisdom teachings are designed to do, to really point out the unreality of the thought construct that we have believed ourselves to be and living as a separate entity. Through that, we call it the ego or the person, the limited consciousness. And that's true. It becomes important to be pointed out that the thought construct or the attitude itself is not who I am. It is what is arising within that which I am, which is the formless, impersonal awareness or consciousness that can open up to itself as there is more clarity on the temporariness of it all, including what I have taken myself to be as this person. So yes, the identification with the content of life as who I am, and that being taken to be the all of it, to be the whole spectrum, is actually, we can say, a cause, but a byproduct of the misunderstanding. So the identification with this body mind organism, which needs to happen very accurately for life to play out as it does, and doesn't need to be the cause of suffering. However, when that does happen, and how we human beings are brought up in this system that we are, it is inevitable to be taken as a separate entity. It is necessary to be taken as a separate entity to function as this body mind organism in this play of relationships with me and other. This play of me and other has to play out the way it does, so that that perception of separateness as being a separate entity is vital for that play to happen. And yet the suffering doesn't necessarily come from that separation. However, the recognition of non-separation of all that is by recognizing the aspect of myself that is formless, that is the consciousness that plugs into this body mind and identifies itself as this human person, whatever the story has been adapted as the system to play out in the flow of life. That non-separation, that recognition of non-separation of all that is, can really be useful to see that the suffering is unreal. The suffering is coming from a belief which is also just a thought, which is taken to be something solid, which is a misunderstanding. And yet, it has to happen for the play to play out. So the identification itself, whether it's the basic kind or the suffering kind of identification would be the belief in the sense of personal doership and attachment to outcome. Again, taking myself and the other as the doer and in control of whatever we say, think, do, feel, and everyone else being in charge of their arisings. And then attachment to outcome being that life, the flow of life, is where my completeness is to be found, is where my end of suffering, in a way, or my end of sense of lack is to be found. And that is the part of identification which is the suffering mechanism, really.
Yeah, it's very funny how we divide our experience into part of the experience which is valid, which is like material experience, what we can feel, touch, sense, smell. That is the valid part of the experience. And this other part of experience, which is more like impersonal, we cannot really see it. It's like emptiness or just consciousness. But even from the point of view of just logic, rational logic, we can see that everything happens from consciousness. That is the main point always, from all our seeing. What we see, touch, smell, that is coming from consciousness. It's very, very funny, very unusual that we are making the other way around conclusion. Actually, our starting point becomes that which is seen. So for me, that is very fascinating.
It is fascinating, and it actually is how, because we're so engrossed in the senses of it, the speaking, the listening, the watching, we're so engrossed in that element of the experiencing itself that is exactly where the search has to start, because the availability of this openness, this emptiness, is just unavailable in that point of view. And yes, it is fascinating how consciousness can completely forget itself and suffer to an extent that it has to start again to come back. And that is the grace, that is the blessing of the suffering, the blessing in disguise that is suffering.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranko. Thank you. Shiv has his hand up.
Hi, good evening.
Hello, Shiv. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you.
It's like just feels like one of my arms has been chopped off, but I can't accept that it's not there. In the sense that you keep saying it's the effort that gets in the way, and in a way, for a while I've been trying. Like this whole entire bhakti yoga is about purifying yourself to withdraw investment from all things worldly and direct it all towards finding God. And so many sages say that once you have that 100% intense cry for help, for God's refuge, then this becomes evident, this discovery that we talk about in satsang. And I mean, all this I also don't know firsthand because I haven't really experienced the endpoint, but it's been hammered into me in a way through so many people. And what you say is also something that people have told me about, that in a way to just surrender and not take myself to be the doer, or just being empty of thoughts, in a way empty of belief in thoughts. And I don't really know. The end point is just that I can't there's nothing I can do to make it happen, and that's a bit what to do until then. Until when it happens, you know? That's my question.
That's a very valid question, Shiv. You tell me I'm not the doer, so then what do I do now? What do I do with that? And you do exactly as you think or feel to do in each moment, because that is exactly what life is arising as within you, as you, as progress or as frustration, as something opening up or something shutting down, as identification or renunciation. So yes, the path of bhakti actually is the path of non-doership. So what happens is, we can say the path of bhakti is more with purification practices, but the ultimate purification is the purification from the sense of doership and attachment to outcome. That is really what it's about. The end of belief in doership and attachment to outcome is equivalent, is the same as complete surrender to God or to life or to the force that is the source of all of this. And how to do it is bound to arise until it doesn't. There you go. Try to, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't know. I shouldn't mute in between, no? Like, I thought it might interfere
Yeah,
with
it's
this.
okay to stay unmuted while we are having a conversation.
Yeah. I came across this one satsang of this person called Gangaji, and there she says, she also says something similar to what you're saying, that what will your practice give you? And at one point she was saying, this practice that you might be doing, being chanting, be it Advaita sadhana, all of that is one part of it. What you do for the rest of the day is your real sadhana. And in a way, we're doing the sadhana of the falls of Maya. I keep taking effort into my hands. I keep taking myself to be the doer. And would you say, since that is the case, there is some practice required to counter it, to resist the temptation to be the doer? I don't know if I actually become the doer, but is there a practice to counter that practice is required? She said that, and seem to click, but I don't really know. What would you say?
So throughout the day, I feel like I'm the doer. And that is exactly how life is designed, to feel like I'm the doer. So when speaking is happening, it is happening in a way where Gurleen feels like that Gurleen is speaking. So when a concept is heard, it sounds like, and it feels like that it needs to feel a certain way, which is another construct that we create in a form of an expectation that, okay, this is what it means. And until it feels like what I think it means, it hasn't happened. So
You
end
mean
of
enlightenment, or what you're talking like?
anything, any fruit of any practice that I may be working towards. So in this case, if we talk about end of doership, that doesn't mean that I stop feeling like I am the doer throughout the day. It doesn't mean that I pick up this cup and I feel like, oh, I'm not picking up this cup. That's not that's not what it means. The cup is picked up. There is a signal that is created. I pick up my hand and I hold the cup and I bring it to my mouth, and then I feel like, oh, I'm not thirsty, and then I put it back. So the end of doership is not about that we stop feeling like we are the doer. The end of doership means simply, it means end of shame and guilt, end of blame and resentment for the other, end of pride and arrogance, and then end of attachment to outcome, which is another umbrella of that sense of personal doership itself. It's just the end of worry and anxiety about the future, and then end of expectation of how it should be or shouldn't be. So how my practice should go and shouldn't go, and what the fruit should be and shouldn't be. It's it just doesn't arise anymore. And not by my doing, not by a fruit of practice, it just arises in this moment, stops arising impersonally, without any gymnastics that I had to do for it. There are some people where it happens so choicelessly, where they're like, what just happened and why did it happen? I didn't even ask for it. I didn't even ask for end of suffering, because there are a lot of rewards that we get out of suffering. That's basically why the system habitually goes back to suffering. It's grace that we want to get out of suffering. Even that desire is out of choice. Until that desire was there, I wasn't identified as a seeker of wanting to get out of this rut. Call it Maya, call it suffering, whatever you want to call it. So if that desire was absent, like it is in so many other people that we are in relationship with, it's just not there. They would call us mad for having such a desire. It's like, what's wrong with you? And truly so, because their own experience, this desire of seeking something more than money or status, or whatever this game outwardly game is about, anything outside of that is like, what are you even talking about, and why would you waste your time on that when it's not making you money, or when it's not winning you social status? Why would you waste your time on anything that doesn't give you that? Because that is exactly what their design, what their system, what their content of experience is designed to make them feel. It's choiceless. And then we find ourselves waking up and feeling like, oh, I need to get out of this involvement in the flow of life, and I need to understand what life is about. And this compulsive, some days compulsive and some days just relaxed and in the background, but it just is there. We can't help it. And that in this moment, exactly through our content of experience, it becomes available to see that it's not my doing. there was a time when I wasn't a seeker. And if someone were a seeker, I would have judged them as like, what's wrong with them? And I've become that now. But by whose choice? I still feel like I'm better off than before, even though I might be aware of more suffering in my system than before. And still there is a sense of a deeper connection with myself, which I wouldn't trade for anything else. And yet there is a frustration because it feels like, then when is it ever going to be over? Then the question becomes, what does it mean? What do you think it would look like when it's over? What does it being over even mean?
I guess, like as you say, up till this point, you would look back and feel it's better off now, the life circumstance, my inner, what can you say, environment. And I guess I just project that forward. If I keep walking this path further, then it'll be more and more of that. And, you know, like I've had sprinkles of it, and then I can sink my teeth into the real stuff and something like that.
Yeah, that's very true. So exactly what I hear you saying is that what the end point, or what it feels like that it'll be over, what would it mean is continuous and unbroken peace of mind in daily living for Shiv. So Shiv is fulfilled in a way that Shiv is not suffering anymore. And that is why this framework here becomes so precious to understand what is suffering. Well, first of all, what is peace of mind? Then what is suffering? Getting aware of suffering in our system in each moment. Oh, when we understand that suffering is basically the five things which come under the umbrella of the sense of personal doership and the attachment to outcome, and then understanding that guilt and shame, blame and resentment, pride and arrogance, worry and anxiety, expectation and attachment to outcome. These are the five forms of suffering that arise within Shiv when Shiv really suffers. Suffers means peace of mind is absent. Where Shiv is believing himself or the other to be the doer, blaming life or blaming the other, blaming God, blaming the practice. And there is a time when Shiv really believes that my completeness is to be found in this arising, or at the end of this arising, or as a fruit of a practice, for example. So it's not that the practice is not going well enough. It is the belief that I believe that this practice needs to work a certain way for me to be happy, or for this to be over. So is it possible to take a step back? And it's not really about what is going on, whether I'm chanting or not, whether I am feeling detached enough or not. And just to really see that there is an identification with me being the doer. That means I believe that I can do something to change what is here, which is coming from the fact that what is here is not good enough already, which is attachment to outcome, that life needs to be different for me to be happy, for me to be okay, for this to be over. So the solution is not in the layer that we are talking. The solution is in the layer from where it feels like what is arising is not okay. And in
Repeat
this
that
case,
last part. Please.
it's behind the layer. So we are talking in the area that, is there something to counter what is arising? But is it possible to see that where the question is coming from is from the belief that what is arising needs to change? That what is arising is already not okay. And that is the suffering. The suffering is not what is arising. The suffering is the belief that it needs to be different than what it is for me to be okay. And that is why I need a practice to change what is arising. because what is arising includes how I feel about what is arising. Is it okay to feel unfulfilled? Can I really allow myself to suffer? And that is the beginning of the fruit of the practice that we're looking for.
I think you just fried my brains. But and I missed quite a part of what you just said. I don't know, it wasn't registering maybe, but I'll watch this again, and somehow I don't know, it's
No, for sure.
something.
It's a tricky one, and it's something it's like, what do you even mean? Like
Yeah.
I'm asking you what's 2 + 2, and you're saying maths doesn't exist. Like what? So I understand. It is tricky, and yet it's so simple when it clicks. But it's not your choice. So if it goes over your head, take a nap. You don't need to register it. It's not your job. It's not my job to register it. Just that we are here and we are exposed to these concepts, and the willingness for you to wanting to listen to it again because something knows that it didn't register the way it could have is already the proof that it is bound to happen. So there are all the reasons we have to be optimistic that it's already going on without our interference.
Thank you.
Pleasure, Shiv. It's wonderful with the honesty and the courage that you come. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for doing what you do.
Pleasure. Raj.
Hello.
Hello, Raj. How are you?
Fine, and you?
Very well. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
So I am not the doer. Then who is then I am not the doer, then who is talking to you now?
What do you think?
It must be I am not the doer. What does it say? I don't know. So what do the teachers have said and you have said? Who is talking to you or what is talking to you is God, that is a universal consciousness, impersonal consciousness, which is talking to you. This is what I understood intellectually.
Yes. So you are very accurate in saying, even if it's conceptual right now, that the impersonal consciousness identified with the personal body-mind mechanism of Gurleen is talking to the impersonal consciousness identified with the body-mind organism of Raj that is listening, and vice versa. So consciousness is speaking with consciousness, and consciousness is listening to consciousness. And you can replace that word with God or universe or cosmic energy, whatever our version of the source is. And intellectually, even if intellectually it makes sense, it's a big win, because we know a lot of people in our own circles that if we would say these words to them, they would be like, are you mad? Like, what are you even saying? I'm I and you're you. And that makes sense. That does make sense in the level that they are speaking from. And it's absolutely true. A fully integrated understanding understands that I am Gurleen and you are Raj, and Gurleen is talking to Raj, and Raj is listening, and Raj talks to Gurleen, and then Gurleen listens. Of course it is like that. And that just brings me the metaphor of before enlightenment, mountains and rivers are real. during enlightenment, mountains and rivers are unreal. And after enlightenment, mountains and rivers are real again. And that is exactly the pinnacle of understanding. So the misunderstanding and the complete understanding may sound exactly the same, and yet they're coming from totally different places of recognition. So we are the doer, actually. That's how it plays out. However, from the point of view of continuous and unbroken peace of mind, if that is what we're looking for, the concept that we are not the doer is very useful to cut the suffering that we find ourselves going through. Because it is in the cutting of that suffering that the unbroken and continuous peace of mind is available, which can also be labeled as enlightenment in words of Buddha, where he said enlightenment is end of suffering. So if only I'm looking for continuous and unbroken peace of mind, that these concepts of I'm not the doer and there is no doer, there is no personal doer anywhere to be found, is useful to be entertained. But if I'm looking to even be one with God, let's say, so if my goal is to just be one with God and I don't concern about suffering at all, maybe this concept can be discarded and some other concept would be more useful. So yes, who's talking to who? Tell me.
God is talking to God, but God deliberately make us feel as if there is an ego and make us feel as if Raj is talking to Gurlin. It is God talking to himself, but God deliberately makes all this game, this feeling of ego and as if the ego, the personal self, Raj is talking to Gurlin. So for me, God deliberately is creating all this game to make it more interesting. Is there no ego? If the game was not played like this, if there was no ego and there was no feeling of the personal self doing stuff, then it is less interesting. For animals, still like that, they have no ego.
Ramesh very beautifully said, the painted object can never know the will of the painter subject. So we may theorize who did this and how it is done and why it's done, all that we want. But we're just
Yeah.
a couple of painted objects trying to figure out who made the painting and why it's made this way and why do you think that color goes there and that color doesn't go there. That's also the colors of the painting. We have the ability to do that, and that is also how the painter subject has painted the painting to be. So who does this and why it's done? Is this really how it is? Who are we to know? Just a couple of human beings in this big scheme of unfathomable existence that we seem to be living in.
When we say, I am I am not the doer, and there is no free will. So this also means, or it is also true to say that every small detail in my life that has occurred was already predetermined. Every small detail, for example, all the books I have written, all the words I have spoken, all the action I have made, all the videos that I have clicked, they were predetermined. And,
Yes, yes. And
and it could not be
predetermined.
otherwise. It could not be otherwise. It was, and it was not me doing them, the stuff. It was God doing them.
Yes. It was predetermined means it was one way. It has been exactly how it has been from the very birth till now. Life has unfolded one way. And even now, the arising of this question or this recognition or observation exactly happened as a seeming effect of all those arisings from the very birth till now. And it has been one way. And looking at that pattern, it is even logically, it is possible to say that it can only be one way. It will be exactly how it will be based on the genes and the up-to-date conditioning and how they function in the soup of existence. Like a chemical reaction of one chemical with another. And even if there's a slight change in one of the chemicals, the reaction may be totally different. And we call it that I changed or situation changed or the other changed. And this is how it seems to be going on. And in an unfathomable manner, we can theorize it again in the form of a framework or a conceptual model. And yet, ultimately, absolutely, we cannot know what is going on, how it's going on. So there is no figuring this out. It is just what's going on, including ourselves in this play of what's going on.
And everything is perfect just as it is. Perfect in the sense that it is according to God's will. In that sense, it is according to the script of God.
Yes. And again, God and life not being separate. So there's not a separate God sitting somewhere enjoying this game going on. God is the game itself. So it's not a separate enjoyer and the enjoyment going on. It's not two, really. So the suffering and the enjoyment is God itself.
Yeah.
Yes. So God did not create a separate me. God is the separate me.
Yeah.
I am not the doer. Really seeing it through doesn't mean that I stop acting, doesn't mean that the thinking stops, taking action stops, having opinions stop. It necessarily may not change anything at all. When we look at life, when we look the way we live life. And yet, what this seeing through the concept of I'm not the doer does if it lands in the way it is designed to land, is to free us as human beings, as Gurleen, of this load of guilt and shame for everything that I've believed that I've done in the past and it hasn't delivered good outcomes, or has delivered pain to me or the other, my loved ones. Frees me from this load of blame and hatred and resentment towards the other, where I believed them to be the doer of something that delivered pain to me, or made us look like, created a circumstance that was painful to me. So that load of blame and that load of resentment, judgment, when it is truly seen that they're not the doer, what was delivered through them is my destiny of the flow of life, of being pleasure or pain. So if pain is delivered to me, that's my destiny of experiencing pain in this moment from apparently the other, who couldn't be any other way in this moment, because the other is the product of their genes and up-to-date conditioning. From the very moment of conception to this moment, they are what designed one way. And so am I. What I am as Gurleen is a product of my genes, this Murmanic coming together and this blueprint being created with its strong points and weak points and looks and generational trauma and the way of absorbing or interpreting the environment, and the up-to-date conditioning, which is the environment that the blueprint has grown up in and it finds itself in each moment. And it changes and keeps changing the system in a way that it is one way in this moment. And that is exactly what the spiritual journey shows also, that the seeming practice feels like that the things that used to trigger us before do not trigger us now. What happened? The system is somehow evolving in a way that what was painful 6 months back or 6 years back, now that same input creates a different output, which is not nearly as painful as it used to be. And if it is more painful, then again, that is the evolution, but in the different direction. So it's not about getting rid of pain and having permanent pleasure in life. That is the misunderstanding, coming from a place of believing that my completeness, my happiness, what I'm really looking for is to be found in the flow of life, in continuous pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And if pain arises, something's gone wrong, life has messed up. I've done something wrong, or the other has done something wrong, and that this couldn't be. This exactly is the misunderstanding. It is not about unending pleasure, and it is not about pain never arising. It's not even about enjoying pleasure and not enjoying pain. What it's really about is the end of doership and attachment to outcome, again, which is the end of guilt and shame arising in the system, blame and hatred arising in the system, pride and arrogance arising in the system, where there had been good outcomes in life because of my actions, and I have taken ownership of them as the doer, that look at me, I'm so wonderful. and you should look up to me and respect me because I've delivered such good outcomes. It is end of worry and anxiety, because having seen that life has been one way up until now, life can only be one way, which is the predestined way, which is exactly how the system will be in that moment and how the environment will be in that moment, and what the reaction will exactly be one way in that moment. And really seeing through that, there is no room for anxiety or worry of what is going to happen in future, because it is seen that it is only one way, and it is seen that whichever way it will either be pleasure or pain, not where my completeness is to be found. So if it'll be pleasure, it'll be enjoyed. If it'll be pain, it'll be worked through and endured. But that's not where my completeness, my happiness, my peace of mind lies. So the worry and anxiety just doesn't make sense anymore in the system to arise. And it is also the end of expectation that how I should be, how the other should be, how the flow of life should be, how God should be, how my mother should be, how my children should be. All of that is just an absence of that narrative of how it should or shouldn't be. Because what I'm really looking for is not to be found out there anyway. So it will be one way, the predestined way, and whichever way it will be doesn't dictate my peace of mind. So it is allowed to be that way. And there's no need to expect it to be any other way, but we'll see how it is. If it's the future, we're looking at it right now in the present, and we have looked through it in the past, the seeming past that has passed. And it's the end of attachment to outcome. If something goes south, it definitely is a challenge and we work through it, but it's not like gone wrong. Existentially, there is no attachment to how this could have happened. So really, practically speaking, this is what it boils down to. End of belief in personal doership and attachment to outcome. And as I love to point out, mostly, that I remember too, that anything and everything that has been said here, has ever been said, or will ever be said, is a concept and not the truth. And let's see what these concepts do or don't do in our systems, impersonally. Whether we feel like remembering them, thinking about them, whether they inevitably interfere in our daily living moments and pointing out, oh, look, there's blame, and oh, look, there's shame. And that's the suffering, not what is really going on, but the guilt and blame that's going on behind it or on top of it. That may happen or not. They're both impersonal arisings. And yet, arisings, not my doing. So there's nothing to do, no homework. And let's see how it goes. Thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for your inputs, your time. Thank you for joining. I love you all. See you next Sunday.